Everyone grows up hearing the same rule repeated like a law of life. Buy a house as soon as you can. That's stability. That's maturity. That's how wealth begins. But there is a version of success that quietly rejects this rule. Elon Musk didn't avoid buying a home because he couldn't afford one. By the time most people are struggling with their first down payment, he was already financially secure. And yet for decades, he chose not to own a primary residence. He rented, not temporarily, not as a transition, but deliberately. While others celebrated signing 30-year mortgages and convinced themselves they were building equity, Elon Musk looked at the same decision through a different lens. He stripped away emotion, tradition, and social pressure, and reduced the question to a single variable: numbers. To him, buying a house wasn't a symbol of success. It was a capital allocation problem. Every dollar tied up in a house was a dollar that couldn't move, couldn't compound, couldn't be deployed into businesses, innovation, or asymmetric opportunities. So while homeowners around him were committing their future income to fixed payments, taxes and maintenance, he kept his capital liquid and flexible. He chose optionality over ownership, velocity over permanence. This wasn't rebellion, it wasn't minimalism, it was strategy. And that decision, quiet, rationale, and deeply unpopular, became the foundation for everything that followed. By the time most people assume someone should buy a house, Elon Musk was already far beyond that point financially. This is important to understand. He wasn't renting because he lacked money. He wasn't delaying ownership because he was unsure. He was already a multi-millionaire. So the usual explanation, renting is for people who can afford to buy, simply didn't apply. His decision came from somewhere far more uncomfortable calculation. He looked at what everyone else was doing and asked a question. Few people are willing to face honestly, if I already have capital, where does it work? The hardest. Most people answer that question emotionally. Security, roots, pride, a place that feels permanent. Elon Musk answered it mathematically. He compared two paths. On one side, buying a house, locking money into a fixed asset, accepting long-term obligations, and hoping appreciation would justify the cost. On the other, renting modestly and keeping capital free to move, free to compound, free to be invested where returns were highest. The math was brutally clear to him. While homeowners were committing themselves to decades of payments, he was committing his money to growth. While others were celebrating ownership, he was optimizing returns. And while many believed they were building wealth, he was measuring what that belief was actually costing them. For him, renting wasn't a compromise. It was an advantage. And once he saw the numbers, there was no emotional argument strong enough to make him ignore them. Most people think they know what a house costs. You ask them, "How much is that house?" They answer instantly, $400,000. And that's where the mistake begins. Elon Musk would call that number a Leonot because it's false, but because it's incomplete. It's the sticker price, not the real cost. And confusing the two is how people quietly sabotage their financial future. A house doesn't cost what you pay today. It costs what it drains from you over decades. The moment you buy, the meter starts running. Interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, fees, lost opportunities. None of these show up on the listing page, but all of them get paid with certainty. A 30-year mortgage doesn't just double your payment, it doubles your commitment. Every monthly check locks future income into a single immobile asset. And while people celebrate owning their home, they rarely notice how little of that payment actually builds value especially in the early years. To Elon Musk, this wasn't a philosophical debate. It was arithmetic. He saw that the advertised price was just the entry fee. The real cost was hidden in time, compounding against you instead of for you. What looked like stability was in reality a long-term capital sink disguised as progress. And once you understand that, the question changes completely. It's no longer, can I afford this house? It becomes, what is this house quietly costing me every year I own it? This is where most people defend themselves. They hear the numbers, they feel the discomfort, and then they repeat the same phrase as if it ends the discussion. At least I'm building equity. To Elon Musk, this was the most dangerous illusion of all. Equity sounds like progress. It feels productive. But when you break it down, most of what homeowners call equity is simply money. They were forced to save after paying massive interest taxes and upkeep. In the early years of a mortgage, very little of your payment goes toward ownership. The majority disappears into interest. You're not building wealth, you're servicing debt. And yet people proudly point to a rising home value and convince themselves they're winning. Elon Musk looked at this and asked a brutal question. If equity is wealth, why does it cost so much to create? Because real wealth doesn't require constant feeding. It grows. It compounds. It produces. Home equity does none of that. It just sits there, locked, illiquid, unusable unless you borrow against it or sell the very place you live. And even then, transaction costs take another bite. To him, calling this investing was a semantic trick. It sounded smart, but the behavior didn't match the outcome. What people called equity was often just delayed access to their own money after decades of payments. And that's when the realization becomes unavoidable. You don't get rich by owning a house. You get rich by owning assets that work while you sleep. Everything else is just comforting language. The most expensive part of buying a house is the part no one sees. It's not the roof, not the taxes, not even the interest. It's what your money could have become. This is what most people never calculate. The down payment alone, tens of thousands of dollars, vanishes the moment you hand it over. That money stops working. It no longer compounds. It no longer has optionality. It's frozen. Then comes the monthly gap. The difference between what you pay to own and what you would have paid to rent. To most people, that difference feels harmless. A few $100s, maybe more. It doesn't feel like wealth. But time turns small leaks into floods. Month after month, year after year, that excess payment could have been invested. Quietly, boringly, relentlessly. Compounding does not need drama to be powerful. It only needs consistency. This is where the math becomes unforgiving. What looks like a responsible choice slowly erases millions in potential future value. Not through bad decisions, but through ignored alternatives. You didn't lose money. You simply never let it grow. And this is why the house feels safe, but is secretly expensive. Because opportunity cost doesn't send bills. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up decades later as the life you didn't get to live. Once you understand this, the conversation about housing is no longer about comfort or security. It becomes a question of sacrifice. Not what you pay, but what you give up forever. By this point, the question becomes unavoidable. If the math is so clear, Why does almost everyone still believe buying a house is the smartest move? To Elon Musk, the answer had very little to do with logic and everything to do with incentives and psychology. Entire industries depend on people buying homes. Real estate agents don't get paid when you rent. Banks don't profit when you invest instead of borrowing. Long-term mortgages are among the most reliable profit machines ever created. 30 years of guaranteed interest payments is not an accident, it's a business model. Then there's the government. Home ownership fuels construction lending and consumer spending. It stabilizes voting behavior. So it gets subsidies, tax incentives, and constant promotion. Not because it's the best choice for individual wealth, but because it supports the system. And finally, there's something even more powerful: human ego. Once someone buys a house, they need it to be the right decision. Admitting otherwise would mean admitting decades of sacrifice might not have been optimal. So people rationalize. They defend. They repeat the same phrases they were told. I'm building equity. At least it's mine. Renting is throwing money away. These are emotional shields, not financial arguments. Elon Musk understood that myths survive not because they are true, but because too many people benefit from believing them and too many others are afraid to question them. And that's how a costly decision becomes tradition. Not because it creates wealth, but because challenging it makes people uncomfortable. Here is where the confusion reaches its peak. People point to a paid-off house and say, "Look, I'm wealthy now." On paper, they might be right. In reality, they're often trapped. Elon Musk drew a sharp line between two ideas most people mix up: net worth and real wealth. Net worth is an accounting number. Real wealth is usable power. Yes, after decades of payments, you may own a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It shows up neatly on a balance sheet. But ask the uncomfortable question: can you actually use it? You can't spend it without selling it. You can't generate income from it unless you rent it out. And if you sell it, you still need a place to live. So the asset that was supposed to bring security becomes immobile. Valuable, but locked. Impressive, but silent. This is how people become house rich and cash poor. They have equity, but no flexibility. They have a roof, but no freedom. They have a high net worth, but low control over their time and choices. To Elon Musk, this was the fatal misunderstanding. Wealth isn't about owning something expensive. It's about owning assets that move, grow, and produce. Assets that give you options instead of obligations. A paid-off house doesn't pay you back. It just stops charging you rent. And mistaking that relief for wealth is how people spend a lifetime working while believing they've already won. At this point, one thing needs to be made clear. Elon Musk was not saying that buying a house is always a mistake. He was saying it is a mistake most of the time for most people in most markets. There are exceptions, but they are far rarer than people like to believe. Buying can make sense if you are absolutely certain you will stay in the same place for a very long time. Not 5 years, not 7. 10 to 15 years at minimum. Only then do the massive transaction costs, closing fees, commissions, taxes have enough time to be diluted. The problem is simple: very few people actually live that way anymore. Buying can also make sense if you are able to purchase far below market value. Not a slight discount, but a deep one. Distressed sales, foreclosures, estate deals. Situations where the margin of safety is built in from day one. But this requires expertise, patience, and often cash, things most buyers don't have when they need housing. Another rare case is when the house itself produces income. Multi-unit properties where rental income covers the mortgage and expenses. In that scenario, you are not really buying a home. You are buying a business that happens to include a place to live. There are also markets where housing is genuinely cheap relative to income. Small towns, rural areas, places where owning costs roughly the same as renting. In those cases, the opportunity cost is limited. And finally, if you are already financially independent, if your investments can support your life, then buying a house with cash is a lifestyle choice, not a financial strategy. The pattern is obvious. Buying only works when it stops being emotional and starts being exceptional. For everyone else, it quietly becomes a drag on wealth instead of a driver of it. Once you remove the emotional attachment to owning a house, a much wider set of options suddenly appears. This is where Elon Musk shifted the conversation. Instead of asking, "Should I buy a house?" he asked, "What creates the most leverage?" One obvious path is renting modestly and investing aggressively. If renting costs significantly less, then owning the difference becomes fuel. Down payment money stays invested. Monthly savings get deployed. Over time, boring consistency does what excitement never can compound. Another path is owning income, not walls. Multi-unit properties where tenants cover the expenses transform housing from a cost into a cash flow engine. You are no longer paying to live, you are being paid to hold the asset. That distinction changes everything. There are also ways to benefit from real estate without owning it directly. Publicly traded real estate investments offer exposure, dividends, and liquidity without repairs, taxes, or personal liability. Capital stays mobile instead of trapped. Then there are strategies that ignore property entirely. Starting businesses, investing in scalable systems, putting capital into assets that can grow at double-digit rates. A business doesn't just appreciate, it expands. It multiplies effort. It rewards focus. Even simple index investing beats the emotional roller coaster of ownership. Regular disciplined investing into broad markets quietly outperforms most people's proudest financial decisions, without drama or stress. The common thread is control. Each of these paths keeps capital flexible, growing, and available. None require 30 years of fixed commitments. None depend on hope disguised as tradition. For Elon Musk, wealth was never about what you owned, it was about what your money was able to do. In the end, the choice becomes painfully simple. Elon Musk framed it as a single question. Most people never dare to ask themselves honestly, do you want to own a house or do you want to be free? For many people, especially those still building their future, the math doesn't allow both at the same time. One path leads to comfort, familiarity, and social approval. The other leads to flexibility, options, and control over your time. The tragedy is not that people buy house, it's that they believe they're investing when they're actually consuming. Years pass, the mortgage gets paid off, the house looks impressive, but the best earning and investing decades are gone. What remains is pride of ownership and a quiet realization that freedom was postponed and never fully arrived. Elon Musk's warning was never emotional. It was mathematical. You can always buy a house later when wealth is already built. But if you buy it too early, you may never build that wealth at all. The house can wait. Time cannot. So the decision isn't about real estate. It's about whether you trade your future flexibility for present comfort. Now that you understand the math, the illusion is gone. What you do next is your choice.